Constitution as a masterpiece of human wisdom. That's a quote. That's a quote from Benjamin Rush, one of America's great founders. Are you familiar with Benjamin Rush? He didn't shy from mixing his faith, his religion, his belief in God with politics. And that's why the secular world hates Benjamin Rush and people like Benjamin Rush in founding times today. I'm Cheryl Chumley. This is Bold and Blunt, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. And if you like Bold and Blunt, I want to quickly mention you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, the online platform for your faith-based podcasts, at washingtontimes.com, and wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, wherever. Benjamin Rush. Benjamin Rush was one of 9 of the men who represented Pennsylvania during the Continental Congress. He was a good friend of John Adams, and he was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. And he called the U.S. Constitution a masterpiece of human wisdom. Why? Because it represented the best that humanity could offer by way of government. It included limits on government and the elevation of individual rights, the recognition of God-given liberties, where government was only put in place to preserve and protect those inherent liberties, those God-given liberties. It included a separation of government branches with checks and balances, a judiciary, an executive, and legislative branch, where none was more powerful than the other, where they were all equal, co-equal partners in this great experiment called America. Now, we've strayed from much of the ideal of the Constitution. We've strayed from much of the vision that the Founding Fathers put forward, that they wanted for America, that they envisioned for American citizens. The idea that an individual matters, it's not the collective. And why have we strayed from that? Well, because we've turned a corner in America where we are no longer putting God in charge, elevating God to the leadership role that he deserves in this country. And that is opening the door for bigger, biggest government to come in and lay the groundwork for being the provider of all for humanity. That's how socialism creeps into a country. That's how communism takes over a country. That's how collectivism blots out the idea of individualism. When the people turn away from God, it opens the door for government to come in and do what God is already supposed to be doing. Government takes over the role of God, and then the people of the nation become dependent on government, and they turn their backs even more against God. That's why America is facing this political and cultural crises right now in America. All roads lead back to God, and all that ails America leads back to the fact that we have turned our backs on God. Benjamin Rush. This is a quote. "The only foundation for a useful education in a republic, which is America, is to be laid in religion. Without this, there can be no virtue, and without virtue, there can be no liberty. And liberty is the object and life of all republican governments. We waste so much time and money in punishing crimes and take so little pains to prevent them." End quote. You know, those who believe in God, those who fear God, those who believe in accountability after this life are people who are less prone to commit crimes because they know that there's an accountability from above. Just because you can get away with something in this material world doesn't mean, for those who believe in a higher power, that you will ultimately get away with that in the end. And so those people, godly people, morally compassed people, people who believe in God, aren't as apt as the unbelievers to commit crimes because they know accountability exists. No matter what happens in this world, they know there's an accountability coming from above. Another quote from Benjamin Rush. We profess to be Republicans, and yet we neglect the only means of establishing and perpetuating our Republican forms of government, that is, the universal education of our youth in the principles of Christianity by means of the Bible. For this divine book, above all others, favors that equality among mankind, that respect for just laws. God isn't just a God of love. God is a God of law and order. Satan is the one who favors chaos. Satan, like many Democrats today, seeks to create chaos so as to create division, so as to create jealousies, so as to create animosities and fights and arguments and wars. And once those chaotic conditions are laid in society, then the people become desperate for anybody to come in and solve and fix and calm and instill peace. And there's your entryway for government. There's your open door for government to come in. Benjamin Rush, he's somebody that American youth should be reading regularly these days. Too bad, so sad, the public school systems would find someone like Benjamin Rush too radical to talk about, to discuss, to learn from. The teachers' unions have a stranglehold on our youth, and unfortunately, today's youth are being taught to hate America, love socialism, regard communists like Karl Marx as great citizens who bring about this great equity or equality or justice for all. Sadly, they don't teach about the horrors of communism, not just the murders, not just the starvation and poverty that results in communist nations, but more than that, the killing of the human soul, the destruction of the seed that God plants in each and every individual that He creates. That's what America recognizes as the root of a great society. American exceptionalism is rooted in the idea of God creating humans, male and female, in His image, and implanting each with a mission in life, a purpose in life, for His glory. And America allows those seeds to root and grow because it's called individualism. It's called freedom. It's called the free market capitalistic system. Other countries fear that because individuals who have an understanding of a great mission in life granted from above don't need government to give to them. And therefore, government, in its fear, knows that it cannot take from them. It cannot control them. If we want America to be great and exceptional, the one thing we need to do as a nation is turn back to God. Get to church, read the Bible, insist on government behaving in a moral, biblical way, so as the Judeo-Christian principles that founded our nation can continue to blossom. Individualism, not collectivism. I have a guest today who understands that core concept very deeply. His name is Mark Burrell, and he's written this book, Rediscovering the American Covenant, Roadmap to Restore America, that lays out pretty much, step by step, how we can win back this great country of God-given individualism. Mark, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Hey, Cheryl, good to be with you.
I want to talk with you because you've written this book, Rediscovering the American Covenant, a roadmap to restore America. And I find it interesting that you speak of an American covenant. What do you mean by that?
So the word covenant traditionally means an agreement, a contract, and it's a word that we don't hear as much today other than usually a marriage covenant. You might hear the term covenant associated with that, or if you live in the suburbs like I do, and you live in a development, you have a covenant there, and all of these carry with it the same meaning, which is an agreement amongst people that you're going to govern yourselves in a certain way. And so that's what the covenant is. And what I say in the book, my assertion is that the fundamental problem that we have in America today, the root cause problem, is not that we're not following the Constitution. It's that we have a significant number of our fellow citizens who have fundamentally rejected our national founding covenant, which is the Declaration of Independence, which is a far more important document than the Constitution because it frames who we are as Americans.
In which it states specifically, very openly, that all rights, we are endowed by our Creator with certain rights, unalienable rights, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And that's the foundation of American exceptionalism, yes?
Yeah, I would, people have tried to describe American exceptionalism so many different ways. The way I would say it is what made us exceptional is we actually got together, or at least our founders did, and sat down and wrote out what they believed. And they followed the biblical process, actually, for not only how they drafted the covenant and the theology that they captured, which you just summarized, but also the process that they followed. All of this is captured in the Bible. And this is what I do in my book that I haven't seen anywhere else. This is why people need to go out and get Rediscovering the American Covenant. Is I start with the Bible, and I just lay out the principles for how to start a nation and how to govern justly. And then I show exactly how the founders followed that to the letter. And that's what really makes us exceptional, because we actually follow the biblical blueprint for how to do that.
Now, the left, as you already are aware, probably already knew this while you were writing this excellent book, will attack what you just said and say that founding fathers never envisioned a nation or wanted a nation where we did not separate church and government. They were largely secularist, so the saying goes. Deists did not believe in Jesus Christ or the deity having a day-to-day influence over people. And you would respond with your research saying this.
Yeah, I would say that if you have no idea about the theology that informed the founding, in other words, the concepts in the Bible, then you could assert such a thing. And so, I mean, this is what really...
That's so polite.
Yeah, well, this is what really caught my attention in this, is I come to appreciate how so many historians, throw progressives in there, but so many historians really don't understand the theology behind what informed what they did. And if you don't, then honestly, Cheryl, you did not fully understand the founding. That's why this is such an important book, because I start with the theology, and then I hard connect it. I draw clear lines to what they wrote and what they did at the founding to show that there's no way that these guys were not strong Christians, or at least really believed in the principles that they signed their name to, that they declared, which is one of the 4 steps to start our nation. So it's from a position of ignorance that they would assert such a thing. And this is why we need a book like this.
And 50 years ago, Mark, a book such as yours, it would be considered interesting, it would be considered important, but it would be considered interesting and important because it would just lay out the facts and give the data and research what people in America already either inherently or explicitly knew based on their public school teaching. Nowadays, a book like yours, sadly, is considered radical.
Yeah. That's true, and it's radical because it's so different from what so many people have learned in the public school system over the last 50 years. And by the way, I provide a timeline and a short, summary of how we got to from 1776 to where we are today, explaining where key judicial decisions like the 47 ruling, which is where separation of church and state was introduced, and other rulings, how that had a ripple effect on our nation. So I not only explain the theology and connect it very clearly to the founding, but I also provide a lot of information on how did we get here. I address a lot of the common concerns, especially from the church. Honestly, Cheryl, I'm trying to wake up the church first.
Yep.
And get them to realize that we do have an active citizenship duty. And so I make that argument. I address a lot of the arguments like evangelism, like it conflicts with evangelism. I address all that in the book.
Yeah, one of the themes that I really am happy to see in your book is the idea that Christians need to become more engaged in culture and in politics, because it has really grated me for a very long time. Personally, I'm a Christian, but I do not like Christians who say, well, I can't get involved in politics because I live in this world and not of this world, or they say that it's all under God's control, God is sovereign, so it doesn't matter what I do anyhow. And so I agree with you. The Christian community needs to awaken, and quickly. And your book harps on this theme.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And the starting point for this is Genesis 9 after the flood, which is where we get the initial information that God wants nations to be fruitful, to increase in number, to spread out, and to govern justly. And the key phrase that we hear in verses 5 and 6 is that he demands an accounting for the shedding of innocent life, which is where we get the initial reference to everyone has a right to their life. But the point is, he says, I demand it 3 times. And this is to everyone coming after Noah. So it's pre-Israel. And so my question is simply this to someone who says what you just said. Whose job is it? Who does God expect to step forward and help govern justly and to start nations in a way that honors him, the way the Bible clearly lays it out? Who else could it be? Could it be people that reject him? Could it be people that don't know him? Could it be people that are baby Christians and don't know their Bible yet? And this is part of what I lay out in the book. To be very blunt, I love the name of your podcast. Who does God expect to do it? If it's not people of faith, who else would he reasonably expect to step forward and establish liberty and justice for all?
So why do you think it is that Christians have gone dormant in recent times? Because, of course, we used to have the Black Robe Regiment, right? And that is anything but quiet in the political world. And so from there, we've come to a time in America where we are growing in secularism, according to all recent polls. And at the same time, Christians aren't all voting in elections. You can read the sad and sorry statistics. So why, in your viewpoint, why have Christians gone dormant?
That's a great question. So, number one, a lot of them don't know. They've never heard the compelling argument, which is what I present in the book. So it's an education opportunity. Number two, what I have observed is a lot of the pastors, the senior pastors in our churches today, our evangelical churches today, if you ask them, what's your gift? What are you passionate about? Almost to a person, they will say about winning the lost to Christ. These are folks that are passionate about evangelism, which is one aspect of the faith, but it's not the entire faith. And so what happens when you have, it would be like putting someone in charge of the church, a senior pastor who is a worship leader. What would your church services look like? They would be 2-hour-long worship services. Now, maybe that's, I'm not knocking that, but if you don't teach the whole counsel of God, that's what you're going to get. And so you get this, number one, people don't know. Number two, I found a lot of pastors in leadership positions in churches are passionate about evangelism, and they think that it conflicts with the political engagement. I debunk that in the book as well. And then number three, the world, or I should say progressives, have got really good at playing on our emotions and our desire to be loving. And so a lot of Christians today just can't bear to be told that what they say or what they believe is unloving and intolerant. They just don't have the conviction to stand up for it, which is what this book will help them get. So I'm finding myself now in positions with where I'm talking to a lot of the senior leaders where I happen to work. And I have that conviction because I've studied it for so long. And I just present the two worldviews. I don't present it in a threatening way. And it's actually an opportunity to share the gospel, because you have to talk about the law of nature and of nature's God and what that means. And so it's actually completely the opposite from what a lot of the modern church folks are saying.
And there's another problem that at least I've talked about in the last year or two that has taken root in churches, and that is the skewed and flawed teaching of the Bible. There are a lot, and I'd love your response in this because, of course, your background and knowledge of the Bible is much deeper than mine. But there are a lot of Christian leaders who truly believe that socialism is biblical and that if Jesus were walking the earth today, that he would be socialist. And I find that just a complete abomination of biblical truths, but that's what's being preached in a lot of churches as well.
Yeah, and this is because most evangelical churches are primarily focused on the New Testament. And so it's easy, for instance, to look at Romans 13, where it says you should submit, and 1 Timothy 2, which says you should pray, and just walk out and say, okay, our responsibility to civil government is submit and pray, come what may. But if you don't look at the Old Testament, where we first learn about it, you obviously have the wrong interpretation. And I lay all this out in the book, in very detailed fashion. On the question of socialism, if you're just reading the New Testament and you read the passage that talks about, everyone sold their stuff and brought their offerings to the apostles, blah, 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 you might conclude that that's what God wanted for us. But remember, Jesus said the whole Old Testament was true, including the moral law. He came to fulfill the law. And the moral law, part of the moral law, is all about protecting personal property. And this idea that if you work hard, that you have a right to accumulate and manage your own personal wealth. And so you have to look at all of that in order to understand. But again, if the pastor of an evangelical church doesn't spend as much time on the Old Testament to talk about that, they're going to miss it. And that's what's happening in the modern church today. They're not taking into account the whole counsel of God on these very important topics.
Yeah, when I read the Bible, I feel as if Jesus is speaking to individuals to give, to do charity, to reach out to those less fortunate, not speaking to Christians to petition and demand their government do these same type of charitable acts. But that's just me.
Yes.
Maybe I'm wrong on that.
But you have that grounding of what the purpose of government is from the Old Testament to get there. And so a lot of folks just skip over that, which is why they miss it.
Well, again, which is why your book seems so crucially important at this juncture in American history, because we're in perilous times right now. We are being attacked by secularist, atheist, leftist, demonic forces, to put it bluntly, on all levels, through our public school systems, into our politics. But just speak briefly to the transgender and LGBTQ agenda alone, how that is tearing down the very foundations of our society.
Yeah, so these movements are a direct result of the two different worldviews. If you have a secular progressive worldview, then this idea that I can change my gender, or I can redefine what appears to be a man-made institution of marriage, that concept, that idea seems feasible. And so it really comes down to, do you acknowledge that there is a supreme being who has a divine law that permeates and sustains the universe, that must be respected, and it's in effect at all times and all places, like the law of nature and of nature's God in the first paragraph of our founding covenant? That if you get around that, then anything is possible. And all you need to do is read the back half of Romans 1, where Paul talks about what happens when people turn away from God, and God turns them over to their sinful desires, and they end up with a depraved mind, and they propose the kinds of things, gender reassignment, all these things that you mentioned become the very logical and predictable result.
And that's where we're at in America now, that the tipping point has fallen on the side of the evil and wicked and less on the side of the dormant Christians. So just to wrap up with this last question, Mark, in your research for your excellent Rediscovering the American Covenant and taking into consideration all the perils facing America right now, do you think, and I know spiritually with God there's always hope, but pragmatically speaking, do you think there is hope for the fate of American liberties as founding fathers envisioned them?
The answer is yes. The subtitle to the book is Roadmap to Restore America. And if you ask the question, what is the biblical path to restore a nation that was once a God-honoring nation, and you can look at Israel and see were there any examples of that, and the answer to that question is yes. Kings like Josiah and Nehemiah, they did something very important. They recommitted to their national covenant. It was their covenant when brokered through Moses, and they brought all the people out. They read the book of the law, and they recommitted. And what did God do? He blessed their reigns. And so the whole point of the book, and I want to end on this and give your audience hope, the whole point of the book is to get us to realize, us as a nation, that the first thing we need to do is recommit to our national founding covenant. And that's how we will engage God and get his help to turn things around. Because to your point, Cheryl, things are so far gone. Surely we're going to need God to help us. And so how do you do that? Well, the Bible shows us the template for doing it. It's to recommit to our national founding covenant. And that's the last chapter in my book.
And the good news is God doesn't need a majority. Just read the story of Gideon. Yeah, just a few people, one person, or no people if he chooses. So that is the note of optimism there. Mark Burrell, Rediscovering the American Covenant, Roadmap to Restore America author. I really appreciate your time on Bold and Blunt.
Yep, good talking with you, Cheryl.
If politicians aren't moral and virtuous, then the political agendas they bring forth aren't going to be moral and virtuous either. And that's basically what's taking place in America right now. We have a largely immoral body politic, and it is running the policies in this country, running the agendas. It's due in large part because of the silent Christian community, the reluctance or outright failure of the Christian community to involve itself in matters of the secular world. We have to be a light in this world. We have to shine a light in this world, and not just shine a light in the churches that we frequent. What good is that? What good is that preaching to those who already know? Thank you for listening. I want to remind you, if you like Bold and Blunt, you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app. You can get Bold and Blunt at washingtontimes.com. And you can get Bold and Blunt at Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Just go to Google and type in Bold and Blunt podcasts, and you'll see the many places where you can subscribe and listen to Bold and Blunt. I appreciate your support. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, stay blunt, stay bold.